An alternate storyline. Susan Allen met Deputy Sergeant Alan Smith, who protected Susan and Roger every night from 8 in the evening to 8 in the morning. During this time, Alan got to know Susan and Roger, and he came to consider these two people as very special. He helped Susan and Roger with creams and salves to help heal the abuse inflicted upon them by her husband, Seth. Roger began to like Deputy Allen very much. One evening as Roger came to kiss Mom goodnight. "Deputy Allen, can I shake your hand goodnight? Isn't that what guys do?" Allen laughed. "Roger, guys shake hands. But good friends aren't afraid to hug." Roger smiled and hugged Deputy Allen. "Good night, Deputy Allen." Nothing unusual transpired between Susan and Alan, except she began to teach Alan to dance. Each evening after Roger had gone to bed, Susan and Alan would dance. One evening as Alan helped Susan apply salves to her back, Alan was alerted by a noise. Alan drew his pistol and began to investigate. He was confronted with a raging madman bent on killing Susan and Roger. The raging man charged Alan with a large knife, breathing death threats, and Alan shot the man and killed him. As it turned out, it was Susan's husband and Roger's father, Seth Allen, who was this crazed individual. When Susan identified Seth as her husband, she became almost hysterical, held on to Alan, and cried out about being free. From that point, Susan and Alan's relationship began to deepen. At least it seemed that way to Alan and all their friends. After a very rocky beginning, Alan asked Susan to marry him, and she said yes. They married in the First Mountain View Baptist Church one Sunday after the worship service. And they began what seemed to be a very happy life together. Alan loved Roger as if he were Alan's own flesh and blood. Alan taught Roger how to play football, be a runner, and quarterback. Roger became the first-string quarterback in high school and led Mountain View High School to the league championship. Roger loved Alan and thought of Alan as his real dad. Roger worked hard, striving to make Alan proud of him. And Alan heaped praise, love, and pride in Roger and his accomplishments. The immediate consequences were that Roger excelled in everything he did as student class president, quarterback, baseball catcher. Nothing Roger did was ever halfway. The love both men had for each other was simply amazing. To top it off, Alan adopted Roger as his own son, and Roger became Roger James Smith. His relationship with Susan and Roger substantially boosted Alan's own self-esteem. No man could have ever loved two people more than Alan loved Susan and Roger. After a year, Susan became pregnant and soon delivered a beautiful baby girl that she named Elizabeth Pearl Smith. Alan was filled with joy, another person upon whom he would shower his love. As Elizabeth grew, Alan poured his love and attention on her as much as he did Roger. He was determined to be the very best father in the universe to these two kids of his. Though both parents worked, they hired Amanda Murdoch to care for their two children while they were working. For the little Smith family, Alan, Susan, Roger, and Elizabeth, everything seemed almost idyllic. The arrangement that Alan and Susan made was working out. The first one home would begin to prepare supper. If they both got home at the same time, the one that did not prepare the meal the night before would take on that duty. Everyone would chip in to set the table, clear the table after supper, and help clean up the kitchen. When Elizabeth was about 5 years old, things began to change. Susan would come home late several nights a week, and she would arrive home about a half hour after Alan had started to prepare the meal. She was always full of apologies but never tried to justify herself. As time went on, the marital relationship between Alan and Susan began to weaken. Alan attributed it to fatigue on Susan's part. She worked hard and long hours saving children's lives. Susan had always been emotionally involved with the children. She loved each one. Her relationship with Roger and Elizabeth was beautiful. She loved them both more than anything else in her world. Roger was now a sophomore in high school and could be depended on to care for himself and Elizabeth. He was a big, strong brother to her and would have defended her with his very life. So, it was not difficult for Alan or Susan to leave the two kids home alone for a short time. Susan was often called out at all hours to see sick or injured kids, and Alan was occasionally called out to take control of dangerous or violent situations at night. Dinner had been eaten, and Alan, Roger, and Elizabeth began to clean up the dining room and kitchen when the phone rang. Alan answered, "Sergeant Smith, dispatch, Sheriff Murdoch has asked you to handle a bar fight at the truck stop." 10-4. Alan hung up and called to Roger, "Son, gotta go handle a fight. I'll be back as soon as I can." Roger answered, 10-4, Dad. When Alan got to the truck stop, he found that the fight had stopped. Two old friends had gotten a snootful and had begun to argue about which was stronger, smarter, and the better looking, which had resulted in a couple of blows. The two suddenly realized their stupidity and hugged each other, and went home. Alan shrugged his shoulders and smiled when a neighbor called him over for a beer. Alan walked over, smiling, "Gotta get home, had to leave the kids there by themselves." The neighbor shrugged, "Oh yeah, I saw Susan walking someplace, thought maybe some kid needed to see her. She's a wonderful doctor, your wife, Susan." Alan agreed, shook his friend's hand, and left to go home. Alan got home to find Roger deep in his homework and Elizabeth playing with her dolls. The little family sat, watched a little TV. At 8, Alan sent Elizabeth to take her bath and get ready for bed. Roger finished his homework and went to his bedroom. About 9, Susan got home, and Alan gave her dinner. Afterward, he cleaned up and asked if she was okay. She smiled and told him she was going to bed. Alan leered at her, but she just shook her head no and walked away. He checked the house, locked the doors, turned out the lights, and went into their bedroom. Susan had already showered and was asleep, as far as he could tell. He left and went to the living room and turned on the TV. Hours later, Alan woke, went to the bedroom, showered, got his uniform for the next day, and went to sleep on the sofa. Alan woke with Elizabeth shaking him. "Daddy, wake up, wake up. It's time for breakfast. Eggs and bacon, and toast, and waffles. Daddy, wake up." Alan grabbed her and began to rub his bewhiskered face on hers. Giggles and laughter, when Susan hollered, "Alan, stop that, time to eat." Alan smiled at Elizabeth, put her down, and got up. "Guess we better do as Mama says." They went into the dining room. Roger was already eating. Susan stood there, foot tapping, a frown on her face, said, "Eat. Both of you." Roger looked up. "Lizzie, better get going. I'm ready to leave." Elizabeth got into her chair, dipped her head, and began to shovel in her breakfast. After a short while, Roger took Elizabeth's hand, and they left for school. Alan smiled at Susan. "Another late night?" She frowned. "Yeah, another late night. I'll see you later." And she left. Alan left, met Amber, and went straight to the sheriff's office. Alan was assigned to patrol the other 3 towns in the county while Amber was assigned to patrol Mountain View. As Alan drove through the town of Twin Peaks, the constable, Peter Swan, waved him down. Peter walked over to Alan's patrol car and leaned in. "Alan, I hear Susan is not working late. Just a word." Alan glared at Peter. "Just what's that supposed to mean?" Constable Swan replied, "I'm not one to gossip, but I just thought someone should tell you what's going on with your wife." Alan's heart stopped. "What?" Peter said. "Better check out the clinic at night, sometime." And the constable walked away. That evening, Susan got home before Alan. When Alan got home, dinner was ready, and his little family gathered around the table for a delicious meal. They engaged in light chatter, catching up on each other's lives. The gnawing feeling in Alan's stomach eased, and he thoroughly enjoyed the evening, even washing the dishes. After the kids were in bed, Susan asked Alan to dance with her. Holding her in his arms, he was content. At bedtime, they showered and made love for the first time in weeks. Just before falling asleep, Alan thought, I guess the constable's warning was just so much hot air, and sleep came. Come morning, Alan and Susan began to get ready for the day. Susan walked over to Alan and put her arms around his neck. Alan, I didn't want to spoil anything last night, but I have one of those required continuing education things next week. Alan shrugged. I'll need to know where you are in case of an emergency. She kissed him. I'll be at the Twin Star Hotel. That's where the conference will be. He smiled, kissed her back. Okay. Good enough. They went out and began their day. As Alan patrolled the countryside, he came across a friend plowing the field. Alan waved, and his friend beckoned him to come over and visit. His friend, Barney, shut down the plow and jumped down to grab Alan's hand. Alan, my old friend, how's tricks? Barney's usual greeting. Alan shrugged. 1313. The friendly code for, as usual. Barney leaned toward Alan. I hear Constable Pete told you to check out the clinic some night. Good advice, my friend. Alan's heart seemed to stop. He choked out. What do you know? Why is everybody telling me these things? Barney backed away, just giving you a little advice. Gotta get back to plowing. See ya. And Barney jumped back on the plow and drove off. Alan found it hard to breathe. He had to find out what this was all about. That night Susan came home about 5:30 and went to the bedroom to pack for her trip to the city. She ate and went to bed, got to get up early tomorrow. The conference starts at 9 sharp. The next morning she got up, ate, and left for the city. Alan spied her keys on her dresser. Picking up the keys, he found the key to the clinic and pocketed it. He would go to the lumber yard and have a copy made. After getting the copy, he returned the original key to her key ring. It would be a week before he might have a chance to check out the clinic at night. On a whim, Alan called the Twin Star Hotel and asked whether the medical conference was in session. The clerk answered, "What medical conference?" Alan realized that there was no medical conference and replied, "I'm sorry, I probably dialed the wrong hotel. Goodbye." That evening, after the kids were in bed, Alan called the hotel and asked for Susan Smith's room. The clerk replied, "I'm sorry, sir. There is no Susan Smith registered in our hotel right now." Alan said, "Perhaps she's registered as Susan Allen." Again the clerk replied, "I'm sorry, sir. There is no Susan Allen either." Alan choked back the lump in his throat. "Sorry, thanks." Alan walked the floor all night, sleep evaded him, he worried, and yes, he cried. Later Friday night, Susan got home. Alan had a light meal for her and asked her general questions about the conference while watching her eat. Tired, they went to bed. Alan was up at 4 in the morning, but he let her sleep in. About 2 in the afternoon, Susan woke and got dressed to begin to plan for Sunday dinner. That evening, after the kids went to bed, as they relaxed in the living room, Alan asked her where she had been. She started to reply when Alan said that he had called the hotel where she had said she would be, that the desk clerk denied that there was a medical conference and that Susan Smith nor Susan Allen was registered there. Susan replied, "Alan, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that the conference had been moved to another venue. The city hospital offered their conference room at no cost. I just took a less expensive motel. I'm so sorry, honey." Alan looked at her questioningly and she said, "I can show you the motel receipt if you don't believe me." Alan shook his head, "I only wanted to know I love and trust you. Come over here and give me a hug." Which she did, without hesitation. They snuggled and then went into the bedroom and then, with a smile, locked the door. Several days passed and their routine returned to the pre-conference normal, Susan arriving home late, tired and uncommunicative. She would arrive home just about the time that Alan, Roger, and Elizabeth would have finished the dishes, about 6:30. Alan would give her a plate of whatever the family had, sit with her as she ate, smiling and listening to her day. One day, as Alan arrived home, he could smell his favorite dish cooking, lasagna. Susan had arrived home before him and began to prepare the meal. The family gathered around the table, gave thanks, and ate, told each other about their day. Afterward they did the nightly cleanup routine and the two kids began their homework. The phone rang and Susan answered. "Smith Residence, Dr. Smith speaking." There was a pause, and then Susan told Alan that there was a kid that needed her attention immediately. She grabbed her coat, kissed Alan and ran out of the door. The car started and she left. Alan saw that Elizabeth bathed and went to bed at her usual time. Roger was in his room finishing up his homework. At about 9:30, Alan felt the key in his pocket and wanted to check out the clinic. So, he put on his uniform and turned to leave. He called to Roger, "Son, gonna do a little patrolling. Be back in a couple of hours. Okay?" Roger called back, 10-4, Dad. Alan drove to the sheriff's motor pool, took his patrol car and drove to the clinic. Taking the key he had made, he let himself into the clinic. He heard voices and a light under a door in the rear of the building. He walked quietly and peeked in the door. He saw David Phillips and his wife naked, getting it on, and he heard Susan say, "I'm sorry, David, but I had to give Alan something." David asked, "Does he suspect anything?" She replied, "Well, he did ask about the medical conference, because he had called the hotel. But I told him what we said we would say if we were asked." Alan felt his stomach lurch, so he quietly closed the door and began to walk out where the pain took hold. His heart broke, and he could not hold back the tears. He sat and began to bawl. Susan and David looked out and saw him. "Alan," they shouted. Alan jumped up and ran out to his patrol car and drove home. After about 10 minutes, he had composed himself and went into the house. He tapped on Roger's door. "I'm back." Roger replied, "Okay." Alan went on, "Son, may I come in a minute?" "Sure, Dad." Alan went in and grabbed Roger, hugged him and kissed him. "I love you, son, good night." Surprised, Roger responded, "I love you too, Dad." Alan went to Elizabeth's room. She was asleep, but Alan looked down at her, tears running down his face. He leaned down and gently kissed her cheek. She rolled over, still asleep, and murmured, "Hmm." Alan stepped out to face Susan. "Alan, I'm so sorry." He just looked at her. "Sorry about what? Getting caught?" She replied, "Sorry that you found out the way you did. Sorry that I hurt you so much." "Why? Is there some other way you want to rip my heart out that would hurt worse?" Susan began to cry. "I never wanted to hurt you. I'm so sorry." Sorry. Alan asked, "How long?" She replied, "The day David hired me." Choking, Alan asked, "Did you ever love me?" She said, "Yes, I loved you. I love you. Just not that way. You are my hero. But it's always been David." Alan was barely able to compose himself. "Why did you marry me?" She answered, "My world was so messed up. David was married. Roger loved you and I needed an anchor. You were my anchor." Tears running down his rugged face. "Do you want a divorce?" She replied, "Yes, I do," Alan whispered. "Then I'll make an appointment for us with Jane Graham. I'll call first thing tomorrow morning." A tear in her eye, she replied, "Thank you." Alan walked out of the house and drove to the truck stop. He sat in the farthest, darkest corner and nursed one beer until 3 in the morning. Alan returned home, got a fresh uniform, showered in the shared bathroom, donned his uniform, and went to work. At 9, Alan called Jane Graham and made the appointment. He called the clinic and made another appointment with Dr. David. Then he called the local realtor and asked about furnished apartments. He found that his old apartment was vacant, and it was available at the same rent he had paid before. He decided to move that day. It would only take one trip to move his stuff to the apartment, and that is just what he did. That night at the dinner table, Elizabeth asked, "Where's Daddy?" Susan took a deep breath and said, "Deputy Alan will not be living here with us anymore. I know that this will be very hard. Deputy Alan and I are going to get a divorce. I know that he loves you too very much, and he will be coming around to visit with you, and maybe you three can do some fun things." Elizabeth began to cry. Roger put his arms around her and just held her close until the tears stopped. Roger's jaw was set, and his eyes were steely, cold. Susan knew this was very difficult for them. Alan was the only real father Roger had ever had, and Alan was a wonderful father to Elizabeth, and she loved Alan very much. Susan went on to say that she was going to marry Dr. Phillips, and they would be a family. Elizabeth, crying again, asked, "Will Daddy come to see me?" Susan shrugged. "Sweetheart, of course he will. But Dr. David will be your daddy." Elizabeth cried, "No. Deputy Alan is my daddy." She began to cry harder. Roger took her hand and the two went to Roger's room, and Susan could hear crying from both kids. Alan met with David. No shouting, no accusations, he just asked for a test to see if Elizabeth was his daughter or David's. As it turned out, Alan was completely sterile. The AK-47 bullet had destroyed his ability to father children. Alan whispered a thank you to David, and he walked out. He and Susan's appointment with just plain Jane was over quickly. All the relevant issues were satisfactorily resolved, at least for the moment. They chose to initiate a no-fault divorce. Alan would have visitation privileges with both children once or twice a week, one day being Saturday. They stood before the county judge and were granted a quick and amicable divorce. Almost immediately, Susan and David announced their wedding. The county's wagging tongues were outraged. However, because of David and Susan's profession, no one wanted to tar and feather them or run them out of town on a rail. When David and Susan began to live together, David wanted to adopt the two kids. It was not received well by Roger and Elizabeth. Alan was asked to intercede with the kids for David, and he talked with them, urging them to accept David, and receive him as their dad, and make up a new little family. Elizabeth and Roger wanted to remain Smiths, but Alan said that it would be best if the whole family were Phillips. Alan told the kids that he loved them very much, but that family was important, more important than he was. In time, Roger and Elizabeth finally accepted the new family idea and agreed to the adoption. Once the adoption was final, something began to happen. Alan's time with the kids began to be diminished until he was told he could no longer visit the kids. Alan meekly submitted to this regimen. And when Amber asked him why he didn't fight, he responded that he loved the kids, and would always respond to any situation with the kids' best interest at heart. Alan had always taken pride in being the best deputy he could possibly be. And he continued to do so, but was surrounded with a dense cloud of melancholy, a profound sadness that dogged his steps 24/7. One day Sheriff Murdoch called Alan into his office. "Alan, I want you to understand, people are concerned about you. You're a damn good cop, but this deep sadness in you puts folks off." Alan gave the sheriff a wan smile. "I'm sorry, Sheriff, I don't know what to do. Everything I have ever loved has been taken away from me." Alan teared up. "I just don't know what to do." The sheriff replied, "Why don't you take a leave of absence, go someplace fun? Forget your problems, find a good woman. Try Reno." Alan replied, "Yeah, I'll think about it. I'll think about it and tell you tomorrow." "Okay?" John said. "Okay. I'm taking you off patrol duty. You'll be dispatcher until you decide what you're going to do. See you tomorrow." Alan went to his apartment and began to pack up his belongings. The next morning, Alan stuck his head in the sheriff's office. "Sheriff, I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to go to Reno. When do you think the department can let me go?" The sheriff answered, "Alan, you may walk out that door, right now. And I'll expect to see you in a couple of months." Alan nodded his head. "Okay. Thanks, John. I'll be in touch, so long for now." And he turned and left. About 3 months later, Sheriff Murdoch received a letter from Alan. He opened it and began to read it. "Dear John, when you receive this letter, I will be dead. I'm writing this letter on Friday, and I'll put it in the mail tonight. And Sunday, I will go out into the desert, to a dry wash I found, put my pistol in my mouth and pull the trigger. I have soft lead bullets and have cut the lead into 4 pieces, just to make sure I'm really dead. I'm so sorry that I have never been the man everyone expected me to be. I know that I have failed as a man, as a deputy, as a friend, as a husband, and as a father. The only thing I have ever done right is be a Marine. In my bank account, there in Mountain View, I have left every cent I have in the world. Please see that it is put to the college education fund for Roger and Elizabeth Phillips, and please tell them that I love them so very much. Would you, please, tell Amber that I have always loved her and took great pleasure in having her as my partner, friend, and sister. Tell Paul he's a very lucky man to have her as his wife, and always do the best for her and their kids, to be the man she deserves. And you, John, care for Amanda and Teresa. You, too, are a lucky guy. Please tell Susan that I will always love her. She is not to blame herself for what I am about to do. I am so sorry that I was not the husband she deserved. As you read this letter, be assured that I am at peace with my decision. I will no longer be an embarrassment to the people I love and cherish. Oh yes, please tell Dr. David that he had better do a better job than I did for Susan and the kids, or I will haunt him for the rest of his life. I have a letter and some money in my pocket telling the authorities here what I have done and that I would like my body to be cremated and my ashes thrown to the wind. John, you've been a good friend, and I want you to know that I love you as a brother. Semper Fi, Alan Arnold Smith. Alan had prepared for this Sunday morning. As he had written to Sheriff Murdoch, he had carved the bullets into 4 pieces. He loaded his revolver, holstered it, pocketed his keys, threw his belongings into a dumpster, and drove to the dry wash to end his life. He parked his pickup and went and sat on the bank of the wash, pulled out his revolver, and contemplated what he was about to do. Everyone he had ever loved had been ripped away from him. He believed every word he had written to the sheriff. He was a failure as a man, as a husband, as a deputy, as a father, as a friend to everyone he knew. He put the pistol barrel in his mouth. He could smell the gun oil. It tasted just like it smelled. He started to pull the trigger, when a Reno police officer stepped into view. She was crying as she walked to where Alan was, and she sat down beside him. She whispered, "I guess we're both here for the same reason." Alan nodded. "I'm Alan Smith, and you are?" She spoke, "I'm Jane Douglas." Alan asked, "Jane, why are you here?" Jane began to cry, a low mournful wail like a lost soul in the depths of hell. "My husband has been cheating on me from our wedding day. He laughed and told me he wanted me to disappear when I confronted him. If I offed myself, he would get everything I own. I wish I were dead." Alan told her, crying, "Why let him get what he wanted? What you need to do is get revenge, file for divorce, sue his latest girlfriend for alienation of affections. Will everything you own to a brother, sister, fellow cop, anybody other than him." Jane smiled. "Oh, I'm glad I ran into you, that's a wonderful idea. But Alan, what about you? Why are you here this morning?" Alan told her what had happened, about the pain of being disowned by his family, his wife's unfaithfulness, the loss of Roger and Elizabeth, his feelings of worthlessness. Jane said, "You gave me such wonderful advice, why don't you do something similar?" Alan brightened. "Let's go get some breakfast." "Denny's." Jane jumped up. "Denny's, let's go." They started to leave. Alan asked, "Where's your car?" She answered, "I took a cab out here. I didn't think I would need it after I did the deed." Alan said, "No matter, I have my pickup." He grabbed her hand. "Come ride with me, Lucille, in my rusty, 20-year-old, F-150. She squeezed his hand and smiled, "Okay." At Denny's, they sat and looked over the menu. Jane asked, "What are you going to have?" Alan replied, "A large stack of hotcakes, maple syrup, hash browns with sausage gravy, and coffee." She replied, "I've been watching my figure for a long time, but that sounds so good. I'll do it." They sat and ate, talking, getting to know each other. Then Jane asked, "Alan, you're such a good-looking guy. Would you be part of my revenge?" Alan replied, "You're not so bad-looking yourself. What do you have in mind?" She blushed, "Let's go to my house and hope my husband catches us cheating." Alan smiled, "Well, since he thinks you're probably dead, he will eventually go to your house to claim it. If we are patient, having fun, he will catch us." Alan drove to her house, and they went in. She locked the front door and led Alan to the bedroom. Alan took her in his arms. "Gee, this feels good." She answered with a sigh, "Yes, it does." She pulled his head down and planted a kiss on his lips. Then she reached down. "Oh Alan, you're a whole lot of man." He smiled an embarrassed smile. "I know, that's what you have done to me." She whispered in his ear, "Let's take a shower together." To which he replied, "All right." They stood in the shower for half an hour. Then drying each other off, they threw all the bedding in the corner of the room, and climbing onto the bed, they began to make love. Afterward, Jane and Alan cuddled happily when they heard the front door open. They got off the bed, got their sidearms, and stood, naked, with pistols in hand, waiting. Then a man walked into the room. Surprised, he shouted, "What are you doing in my house?" Suddenly the man realized that it was Jane standing before him, naked, pointing her pistol at him. Jane said quietly, "Remember, this is my house. I would also like you to meet my new boyfriend, Deputy Sheriff Alan Smith." She put her hand on Alan's tattoo, a globe and anchor. "Alan, this is Todd, my husband. You know, he was one of those cowards that ran to Canada when he got his draft notice." Alan's face contorted, eyes grew cold, he lifted his pistol. "Basically, Todd, run and never look back." Jane said, "We're going to change the locks. Anything of yours get now and run." Todd yelled, "Anything of mine is yours." And he ran out of the house. Jane put her arms around Alan's neck. "Oh Alan, that felt so good. I'm so glad I found you in that dry wash." Alan kissed her. "So am I."